Hello and welcome to Soho Editor's Photoshop Tutorials, Tutorial 1, the Toolbar. In this tutorial we're going to take a look at the toolbar in Photoshop and we're going to learn a little bit more about it. So let's get right to it. You can see that I've already got Photoshop up and running, and in this case I have the PC Creative Cloud version of Photoshop, the most recent version of Photoshop. But you might find yourself using an earlier version of Photoshop, or you might be using Photoshop on a Macintosh. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the differences that you might come across with the toolbar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a screenshot that I took of a much earlier version of Photoshop. This is Photoshop CS2 version, and it's also the Macintosh version of CS2 Photoshop. And we're looking at this so that we can compare some of the differences and see some of the differences that you see on earlier versions of Photoshop in comparison to more recent versions. So the most obvious thing that is different when we look at an earlier CS2 version of Photoshop is that it has a light colored interface, whereas my more recent version has this charcoal grey interface. That's a preference that you can change, and before we look at how you change that preference, what I want to point out is that the preferences are accessed from a slightly different place on Macintosh versions of Photoshop in comparison to PC versions of Photoshop. On a Macintosh version of Photoshop, we have this additional Photoshop menu here that the PC version does not have. And Adobe have made use of that Photoshop menu on the Macintosh version so that when you click on that Photoshop menu on your Macintosh version of Photoshop, you get a drop away and the preferences are located there. But of course, on our PC version, we don't have that Photoshop menu. That doesn't make any difference in terms of functionality, but what it does mean is that the preferences have to be located somewhere else. And on the PC version, they're located on the Edit menu. So on your Mac, click on the Photoshop menu to get to the preferences. On your PC, you go to the Edit menu. You come down to where the preferences are, you get a flyout, and in this case, the bit we're interested in is the interface option, and we can see that I can change the color of the interface. So if you're looking at my version of Photoshop and thinking that it doesn't look like yours, you can see that that's a preference that can very easily be changed. Preferences, interface, color theme. There you go. Now, another rather obvious difference between this older CS2 version and my more recent CC version of Photoshop, since we are talking about the toolbar, is the fact that the toolbar is displaying in 2 columns on this earlier version of Photoshop, whereas on mine you can see that it's displaying in 1 column. Now, that's a preference that you can change, but you change it in a slightly different way depending on which version of Photoshop you've got. On more recent versions of Photoshop, you have this little double chevron icon up at the top of the toolbar, and you simply click on that and it expands the toolbar into 2 columns. If you click on it again, it contracts it back down to its default single column setting. Now, on this CS2 version, you can see that there is no little double chevron icon at the top of the toolbar. So on earlier versions of Photoshop, if you haven't got that, what you can do is you can go into the preferences and you'll see options for display your toolbar in a single column or a double column. So if you are on an earlier version of Photoshop, you can still display your toolbar in a single column or a double column. You just have to do it by the preferences, and that's why I took the trouble to point out that where you find the preferences on Mac versus PC versions. Now we've got all that cleared up, I can close this screenshot and we can have a look at the toolbar and some of the things that it does. So the first thing that I'm going to note is that when you hover your mouse pointer over any of the tools on the toolbar, you get a tooltip coming up, and the tooltip gives you 2 bits of information. It tells you the name of the tool, and it also tells you the keyboard shortcut that you hit in order to select that tool. So if you're the kind of person that likes keyboard shortcuts, you can learn that this lasso tool can be selected by hitting the L key. So I can press L on my keyboard and that will allow me to select that tool. I could also, of course, simply click on these tools. So if you prefer to use the mouse to click on things, then that's great. But if you like keyboard shortcuts, then that's a great way to learn the keyboard shortcuts for Photoshop. Simply hover your mouse over things. Now, the other thing that's worth noting with the toolbar is there is a lot more to it than meets the eye. Almost every tool on the Photoshop toolbar actually has several tools in that location, and you can tell any tool that has that going on because it will have this tiny little triangle icon in the bottom right hand corner. If you see that triangle icon, what that means is that there is more than one tool in that location. Now you can get to that tool or those additional tools in 2 ways. If you prefer to use the mouse, you can simply click and hold your mouse button down and you'll get a flyout menu where you can move your mouse cursor to another tool. You let go of the mouse button and sure enough you've got that other tool selected. But if you prefer to use keyboard shortcuts, what is worth noting is that there are 2 tools on here that both have the M keyboard shortcut. Now if I know they both have the M keyboard shortcut, sure enough I can select that tool by pressing M on my keyboard, but what I can also do is I can hold the Shift key down and press M, and what that will do is it will toggle to the other hidden tool. If I hit Shift M again, it takes me back through. But only two of the tools in that location have the M keyboard shortcut, and it would be nice if we could get to all four tools using that method, and we can. We simply assign the M keyboard shortcut to these other tools. Now it doesn't matter what version of Photoshop you have, this is always done in the same way. You simply go to the Edit menu, you go down to where it says Keyboard Shortcuts, and this palette will open, and we can see that you can assign shortcuts to application menus, panel menus, or what we're particularly interested in for this tutorial, which is the tools. So you can see the rectangular marquee tool and the elliptical marquee tool both have the M keyboard shortcut, but the other two tools that are on that flyout do not have a keyboard shortcut assigned to them. So you simply click on the name of that tool, a window opens up where you can type a key. So I'm going to hit the M key on my keyboard, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to click there, I'm going to type M, and then I'm going to hit Accept up here, and I'm going to hit OK. And now we'll see that all four tools in this location have the M keyboard shortcut assigned to them. So if you like your keyboard shortcuts, hit Shift and M and you will toggle through all four tools. So there's a great little trick if you like keyboard shortcuts. And it is worth noting that you can do that because there are quite a few tools on the flyouts on the toolbar that do not have keyboard shortcuts assigned to them. For example, if we look at this pen tool, you can see that only two of those tools there have a keyboard shortcut assigned to them. But we could do the same thing as we did with these tools up here. We could go to the Edit menu and we could assign the P shortcut key to these three other tools, and that would allow us to Shift P and toggle through all five tools on there. So there you go, some great tips on what the toolbar does and how you can learn those keyboard shortcuts. Now one last thing before we finish this brief tutorial, it's also worth noting that when you hover over these tools, it tells you the name of the tool. Now lots of people who use Photoshop tend to sort of name things and refer to the tools by their own name. So lots and lots of people call this, for example, the arrow tool, but of course it has a name that Adobe have assigned to it, which is the direct selection tool. And if you were looking for help on this tool, if you tried searching for help on the arrow tool, you're not going to get very far. But if you know the name of the tool and you do a search for help on the direct selection tool, then you're going to be able to find the help. So if you wanted to go to the help menu in Photoshop, or you wanted to look on the Soho Editor's website to see if we had a tutorial on a specific tool, knowing the name of the tool is going to get you there to that tutorial quicker. So it's worth learning the proper names for the tools. So there you go, the toolbar in Photoshop. Hope that helped you a little bit, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you again soon for more Photoshop tutorials. Goodbye for now.